I'm Richard Sher, and it's time to square off with our all-star panel this week. Let's meet the king of rhetoric, Professor Rick Vatz, Mr. Politics, Hassan Giordano, and outstanding attorneys, Tonya, Bana, and Chris Kennedy. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, thousands of you watching, and our audience continues to grow. So, Mr. President, would you, under any circumstance, consider issuing a pardon for your son, Hunter? Over and over, interview after interview, President Biden said no. Last weekend, the no's turned to yes, and Biden pardoned Hunter. Politicians from both sides of the aisle expressed shock, slamming President Biden for breaking his promise to stay out of the criminal cases filed against his son, Hunter. Chris Kennedy, kick it off.
Well, Richard, there's persuasive arguments on both sides of this issue. I get that. I think Biden over-explained his reasoning. I think he simply should have said that, hey, I'm worried about Trump and his acolytes, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, going after my son for new issues from his time with Burisma in Ukraine or his dealings with China. And that's why they had the pardon last so long. It's a decade, which is incredibly long. So I think if he would have referred to it more in an abbreviated fashion and a prospective fashion, and maybe even hinted at preemptive pardons for some of the J6 folks, the criminal attorneys, and possibly the congressional investigators, then I think it would have sold better if he would have packaged it. But I think that's probably what, if he had to do it all over again, he would have done.
Well, in changing his mind, the president says he, quote, believes in the justice system, but he also believes that politics infected the process and led to a miscarriage of justice. Hassan, jump on in here.
I don't think he really does believe in the justice system. I think the pardon process has become a political joke. This is a process created to really free innocent men and women who are behind bars, or those who people believe should not have gotten the lengthy sentences that they got, as we know that we've seen with this criminal justice system mostly being distorted towards Black and brown men and women over decades. And yet now it's become a political football between both parties, where I'm finally at least seeing that Democrats have the testicular fortitude to do what Republicans and Trump would have done over and over again. But at the end of the day, they need to stop making it about them, themselves, their family and friends, and start looking at the innocent men and women behind bars who really deserve these pardons.
Tonya, I saw you shaking your head yes at Hassan's comments. What are your comments?
Well, I think I agree with Hassan and Chris. If I were President Biden, I would absolutely pardon my son. I would also pardon Fonnie Willis preemptively. Fonnie Willis, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Ken Ravenel, Marilyn Mosby. I mean, I would package a bunch of pardons for people who have been either selectively targeted for prosecution or have been identified as targets of the Trump administration. And I would do it unapologetically because certainly President Trump wouldn't apologize if he did something similar.
Professor Vatz, Colorado Democratic Governor Jared Polis says, quote, Hunter brought these legal troubles he faced on himself, and one can sympathize with his struggles while also acknowledging that no one is above the law. Not a president and not a president's son. Professor Vatz, it's
That's what Joe Biden kept saying. There are really few cases in which a president states an unqualified principal position and then just reverses it. President Biden has lost the support of everyone who's rational, who's not tied to his family. I think this is really an outrage to state over and over through his press secretary himself that he's not going to issue any pardons and then to issue pardons. Historically, by the way, pardons are generally not very successful when people try to solicit them. The ratio of people who solicit pardons to people who get them is very, very low. And so this is this is just a blanket pardon for Hunter for anything he may have done, would have done, was thinking of doing. And it's really outrageous. It embarrasses the Democratic Party, and it should.
Richard,
and speaking to Richard's point, just quickly, if looking at the very selective process, 259 pardon petitions were submitted to the President Biden in 2022. Only 3 of them were granted. In 2023, 380 petitions were submitted and only 9 were granted. So that shows the selective process that Dr. Vatz was just talking about.
Except that,
Right.
I mean, I would like to see what the statistics are with respect to President Trump, who pardoned his son-in-law's father and then made him the ambassador to France. I mean, come on. Hassan, you were right. The Democrats, you can't fight a fair fight with someone who's not fighting fair. And, trying to have the moral high ground and not be hypocritical has gotten the Democrats exactly where they are, which is losing right now. The fact of the matter is the American public has such a short attention span. Nobody's going to remember any of this when the midterms happen and when the next presidential election comes around. He should just do what's right, protect his family, protect the people who've been targeted by the Trump administration.
Chris, let me, before we get to you, let me remind our audience that then President Trump pardoned Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, as well as Tonya was mentioning, his son-in-law's father, Charles Kushner, who Trump has now nominated to be ambassador to France. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say one way that I would have expected Trump's team, or at least his supporters in the media, to sort of fight back at this is to say, there were no cases brought by Biden or the Justice Department under Biden against Ivanka Trump or Jared Kushner, despite them clearing a cool $600 million from their personal deals while they were working as White House employees, and Kushner cutting deals in the Middle East and Ivanka Trump cutting deals with China. Arguably, they violated the federal conflict of interest law, which is Title 18, Section 208. That's a $50,000 fine per count and 1 to 3 years in prison per act. Nobody has said boo about those two. And isn't it interesting that they both have kept an incredibly low profile for the past 4 years and kept their mouths shut? Because I think they have been worried about that very thing.
Hassan, I'm going to get to you in a second because I want to ask you about this pardon. Former Baltimore City Council President Nick Mosby, in the middle of this week at the Board of Estimates, is asking President Biden to pardon his ex-wife, former City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, who was serving a year of home detention and for convictions for perjury, making a false statement on a loan application. You think that the president should pardon Marilyn? Hassan?
I don't, but I think that was, look, I get it as a former husband, as a father to her 2 young daughters, why he would want to make that plea. I think it was very distasteful to do it at the last formal action that you have as a legislator at the Board of Estimates, where that had really no place at all to do. It's not like President Biden's watching the Board of Estimates for Baltimore City. But I do think that it's very hypocritical when they continue to make these arguments as if this was some witch hunt from the Trump administration, when in fact it came under the Democratic establishment of the Biden administration. U.S. Attorney Eric Barron, who's a Democrat, last I checked, but doesn't play politics when it comes to prosecution, who saw this through. And when they talk about the issues facing her, when you go through the various, whether it be the lies of the letter that her husband gave her $5,000 when it was actually her money that was funneled to her husband and sent to her, or whether it be, actually claiming hardship from the COVID-19 era claims when she, in fact, her pay went up. I don't see a political retribution in this particular case itself, but I'm sure other guests on this show will argue against that.
Well, let's hear from one. Go ahead, Rick.
I just wanted to get back up for a moment to the earlier pardon issue. Hunter was convicted of gun felonies, income tax evasion, large amounts of income tax evasion, and for Joe Biden to imply that these are politically trumped up charges, but not to claim that that had been the case before the election. I mean, it's obviously political expediency that timed this for President Biden. And again, his use of simple lying. I don't use the word lying much when I talk about politics because it's so frequent, except in its abject form. And so this is really an outrage. And I think that he has earned the complete contempt of the Democratic Party, except for those who are related to him or part of his administration. You don't hear serious Democrats defending Joe Biden on this. Their remarks are he should not have misled the American people so serially as he did. And as for Marilyn Mosby, I mean, I think it's really tasteless for her husband, her ex-husband, to be lobbying for a pardon. I mean, this is like saying, if we're in the family pardoning business, Mr. President, why not use my family? I mean, it really shows how ridiculous this entire process is becoming.
Interesting discussion. Thank you all. And Hunter has been pardoned. So we must step aside and pardon ourselves because, ladies and gentlemen, here he is again. The award-winning voice of Square Off, Howard Mallison. Howard, looking great.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. You know, it amazes me how crazy some people drive on high-speed roads these days, weaving in and out of lanes. I'm telling you, you can't go on 83 or 695 without fearing for your life sometimes. You know, that's why there's so many accidents. And Leading Edge Auto Body and Mechanical Repair want you to know that the insurance companies cannot tell you where to take your car. Check out their reviews on Yelp and their 5-star reviews on Google. Leading Edge works on all makes and models and offers free pickup and delivery anywhere in the Baltimore area. Give them a call at 410-433-6433 or visit them at 5807 Falls Road in the heart of Mount Washington. They make your car look and run like new again. And without a doubt, Baltimore is one of the best, if not the best, diner towns in the country. Richard and I were over there this past week and met with John, the owner. Richard, he is the greatest guy going, isn't he?
Fun.
He's fun. He's a great guy, and it's a great place. The food is fabulous. They're the most popular and award-winning diners in Baltimore, the Double T diners. TT means totally terrific. For breakfast, lunch, or dinner, the Double T menu offers you so many choices you'll want to order everything. And everything is delicious. Plus, you have to save room for dessert. And with locations on Route 40 West, Perry Hall, White Marsh, Annapolis, Pasadena, and the EC Diner in Ellicott City. Plus, Monday nights are lobster night at By the Docks in Middle River. All part of the Double T family. Back to you, Richard.
And Leading Edge is the very best. I can assure you, both of our vehicles have been in there, and they are so trustworthy, and the cars look like new. So let's give congratulations to Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott, who this past week becomes the very first mayor of Baltimore in 20 years to be reelected for a second term. In his inaugural speech, Scott said he grew up in Park Heights, witnessing a shooting when he was at age 9, to now leading Baltimore as an adult. Tonya, Bana, what do you have to say about the mayor's second term? Or his
Well,
first?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't be celebrating, the fact that he's the first to be reelected in 20 years. I mean, he was elected with the thinnest of margins and the lowest, voter turnout in forever. I think 12% of the possible voters. He certainly is not someone who enjoys a mandate from the citizens of Baltimore. And I think that he's got to do things very differently in this next term if he's going to be a serious mayor or if he's going to have a political career after this term, because he right now is functioning like a dictator, and he is the mayor of everyone in the city, not just the people who voted for him.
How's he acting like a?
I mean, I can't really speak to specifics because of a lawsuit that I'm involved with or a case that I'm involved with, but that. Without getting into details of that, I mean, he's well known to have a very sort of dictatorial leadership style. And I don't think that the citizens of Baltimore are well served by that.
And I can back her up on quite a few dictatorship type of actions that were taken over the past 12 months, let alone the 3 years that went prior to that. So let's not act like Tonya is far off on this one at all. We can bring on a whole host of guests that I'm sure would love to come on Square and talk about how they were fired unjustly under this administration. And again, I don't always attribute, look, you're the boss, so you're going to have to take credit for or be blamed for whatever happens under your administration. But I do think there are people that are under him that are making these decisions, these rash decisions in many cases, or these, kind of petty decisions in others, that he's going to have to really do some soul searching. What I want to see is how this administration changes moving forward. Will that same administration that led him here for 4 years, will that drastically change, or will those same individuals be in the same places doing the same things for the next 4 years? I think we'll really tell the tale of time for him.
Rick, hold on just a minute. Mayor Scott's achievements include a 24% reduction in homicides, a 34% drop in non-fatal shootings. He says that the Baltimore Police Department has recently taken 10,200 guns off the streets of our city of Baltimore. Go ahead, Rick.
Let me say that I am not impressed by his second inaugural, nor was I impressed by his first inaugural, which simply laid all the problems he had to COVID. In his second inaugural, he talks about minor diminution of homicides and so on, and the squeegee workers having been diverted, and the city's unemployment rate has slightly gone down. But the fact is that there are major problems that he doesn't address. By the way, I always tell my students, as soon as you hear somebody use the word holistic in a speech, you know they're BSing you. And of course, there was the word holistic in his speech. And he also warned of Trump, as if that's a big problem for him. The fact is that the city has all kinds of problems that haven't been addressed. The bullying, the poverty, the education. Have you looked at the education numbers? Have you looked at the proficiency levels in math, in English? They're incredibly low. The city's in terrible shape, and all he wants to talk about is a minor fall down in homicides, although the number of shootings is in debate. But he says, I take him at his word, that the number of homicides has been diminished. But he has not, and he does not intend to, produce a better city. He says not a single word about education. He says not a single word about improving the city in these areas. And I think it's just appalling.
Richard.
And
Yeah,
fatherlessness is something I always talk about. The fact that 80% of Baltimore families are single parent families. There's nothing in the speech about that, nothing at all. Why wouldn't he even address that?
Very good,
Richard.
Rick. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, on Rick's last point, he and I have talked about this many times on the show. I think the definition of family in the year 2024 is very different than maybe the definition in previous generations. But listen, this is one of the toughest mayoral jobs in America. Let's not kid ourselves. There's clearly a lot of issues that need to be addressed and tried to improve. And everybody that's spoken on the issue has been right on the mark about these things. I do think that he does have a chance, which I think is an achievement, to get the 2024 killings below 200 for the first time in 13 years, which I think would be a big achievement. I am kind of impressed that he's trying to recoup 2% of the local sales tax that usually goes to the state in order to tear down more vacant homes and reduce the property taxes in the city, which are tremendously high. He's talked about giving a $1,000 tax cut in property tax per house. And I think that at least some of the economic issues that he's looking to seem positive. Listen, the two things that haven't been talked about remain the biggest problems to me, and those are the carjackings and the robberies. And he needs to get his hands around those two problems immediately and try to be more open-minded in his second term. I think that with Zeke Cohen coming in as the new city council president, I like this guy. I think he's going to work well with Scott. And quite frankly, I think down the road, Zeke Scott is going to be a pretty darn good mayor himself.
But Chris, the violent nature of Baltimore to which you refer is all a product of family. That's never mentioned
No,
in
it's
his
not.
rhetoric. Just a
No,
second.
it's not.
It just no, it's not. You look at areas in which the number of single parent families are much fewer than they are in Baltimore, and you find less crime, you find less drug abuse, you find less gang activity. It's all focused on family. He never mentions this because he's afraid to put any kind of incentive on two-parent families or disincentive on single-parent families.
And
Rick,
look, I'm gonna
you
have to
used
push
an
back.
absolute. If I can jump in real quick, you just used the absolute of all. And knowing you, you know that absolutes can be dangerous. I'll concede that that's an issue. But listen, the shutdown of Bethlehem Steel, the NAFTA agreement from decades ago, the decline of unions has all led to decreased job opportunities in the city, and that plays a huge role in the decline of society in the city and the difficult crime problem that we're dealing with.
Let me for just 1 second. This is exactly why I can appreciate Brandon Scott, because as a young Black man from Baltimore City, he doesn't have to debate the issues that he grew up understanding, knowing, and seeing. And that's one thing I can appreciate about this mayor, that he has taken and turned the tide to say, I'm going to no longer do business as usual. I'm going to make sure those who I saw who were disaffected, who were not given a chance growing up politically, and as you say, without families, so to speak, are given those advantages, that are given those deals, who are brought into the business circles of Baltimore City that were never brought in before. And so, it's one thing that y'all can debate this here on Square Off. Brandon Scott is living it, and I definitely have to appreciate that he's trying to at least turn it. He may not have spoke about it in his speech, but you got a very limited amount of time in the speech, and you got a lot of things to address in Baltimore City. I can say without a doubt, 1,000%, that Brandon Scott wakes up every day worried about and thinking about Black families in Baltimore and how he can turn the tide for them.
Well, Hassan, I read the entire speech. Let me tell you, there was plenty of time to bring in the fact about families, and he chose not to. And so when you say that he didn't have time to bring this up, you always have time to bring anything up. And this is a major, major contributor to violence in Baltimore, misery in Baltimore, unemployment in Baltimore, and underemployment in Baltimore.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, unfortunately, we're going to discuss the Justin Tucker crisis. Howard, take it away.
Thank you, Richard. The law firm of Barry Glazer specializes in personal injury, medical malpractice, and nursing home neglect. Barry's creative TV commercials have made him a very recognizable figure, so much so that you can't walk down the street without people coming up and thanking Barry for telling it like it is. Barry and his team, they have an in-house doctor, in-house nurse on staff. In fact, you should call Barry before you call the insurance companies. His clients will tell you that Barry gets you more compensation than you'd ever expect, and he's that good. Give the law firm of Barry Glazer a call at 410-547-8568 and let him know you heard about him on Square Off. And now the Ravens are still in a quest for a Super Bowl, and let's hope that Justin Tucker gets his mojo back. So what a better way to watch it than to going to Pappas sports bars and restaurants. You can dine in the sports bar surrounded by tons of big screen TVs, or you can have a gourmet meal in the dining room section of Pappas. Either way, you can enjoy the award-winning Pappas crab cake, imperial crab, and much, much more. Plus, they ship crab cakes all over the country. And at Pappas, you're going to enjoy a dining experience second to none. Tell them Richard Sher sent you for the fabulous
Fab cakes.
There you go. There you go. Back to you, Rich.
Thank you, Howard. All right. So the Ravens have a bye week this week. Next Sunday at 1, they'll take on the New York Giants. We've seen what happened. He's the greatest of all time. The people in Baltimore, Ravens fans, are asking, What has happened to the GOAT, the greatest of all times, Justin Tucker? Such a great guy, such a wonderful asset to the city of Baltimore. Hassan, you're our Ravens maniac. What do you think? What's going on?
He's old. I mean, look, you can't be the best forever, right? LeBron was the best for a very long time, and he's old now. He's not getting it done. I think,
he's 40.
He is. But in the game of football, 35. Think about it. Think about when we were talking about Tom Brady. Now, there's a very different position, right? Nonetheless. But when you get to that level, it's at time, and I think this is a detriment to John Harbaugh and the Ravens, that we have not, prior to this year, started looking at and even bringing in on the secondary kind of another kicker, a replacement for Justin Tucker. We thought that he was going to take us, to the prime every year, all I guess up to he was 70 years old. They got to realize that he's gotten us this far. At this point, I'm done. Like, there's no way in the world we're winning a playoff game with Justin Tucker as the kicker. And it's, last minute of the game, we need a field goal to win. I'm not putting my faith in Tucker. I'm sorry.
Richard.
Go ahead, Chris.
So he's actually 35. He's not 40. And there's 4 NFL kickers that are in the league right now that are 5 years older. Listen, I'm just speculating. Here's what I think's going on. He has an undisclosed injury to a thigh, quad, or hammy that he doesn't want to talk about, that the team doesn't want to talk about, and he's working his way through. The man has never missed a game in 13 seasons. He has the record for the longest field goal of all time. And he's just fine. He's just working through an injury, in my opinion. And I did some field goal kicking for my high school football team. And here's what I think he's doing. With that injury, he is overcompensating by striking the ball harder than he otherwise would. And that's just natural human nature to do. It's the same concept with a golf ball. And what happens is, if you do that as a right footer, you're going to hook the ball left. And look at the 10 field goals that he's missed this season. 9 of them have hooked left. That's what's going on. And the fact that he has his plant leg so close to the ball, closer than most other kickers, gets more power and torque, but it also increases the risk for the ball hooking with the slightest difference in his approach. And he's very precise.
But isn't that selfish, Chris? Isn't he costing us games? If he knows he has an injury, shouldn't he say, you know what? Let me go out. Let me get this switch. Y'all get a kicker, not to replace me forever, but at least until I get better.
Hey, Chris.
Well, listen, there's no way he hasn't told John Harbaugh about that, who, by the way, was one of the best ever special teams coaches before he became a head coach.
Chris,
Harbaugh knows what he's doing.
I have a square off fan, Chris Kennedy fan. And what was your question? In high school, what was your long field goal?
42 yards.
How many?
42 yards.
Well, congratulations. That's great. Harbaugh says he is not unwilling to bring in other kickers to see what's cooking.
Let me say one thing about this, if I may. First of all,
does this have to do with fathers?
Can't hear what you're saying.
Fathers who can't.
No.
Oh, go on.
Let me say, first of all, I was a top-notch amateur tennis player through the age of 45. But some people lose it at 35, some people lose it at 40, some people lose it at 42. Also, the Ravens know the answer to this because in practice, when you're a kicker, you can find out whether the kicker has the leg strength, whether he has the aim that he normally has. I agree with everything Chris said. This is not a time certainly to give up on Tucker, but this is a time to analyze exactly what his situation is and go forward with it. I think if they get rid of Tucker, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say, if they get rid of Tucker, I think it's going to be a gigantic mistake, not only for the team, but also psychologically, also physically and psychologically for the team.
Tonya, you get the last word.
I don't care about Justin Tucker, but I can't let the show end without saying that, correlation is not causation. Rick, you know that. And we cannot, I'm not going to allow us to demonize single parents, particularly single moms, because most of my contemporaries, and I myself was raised by in a single parent household by a mother, and most of my friends are successful contributing members of society. That is not the issue.
I
Well
hear
said.
this. I
Well
hear this
said.
all the time. And
Rick.
let me say there are many exceptions, but the fact is that when you have correlation after correlation after correlation, pretty soon you have to infer cause. And
All
the
right,
fact is that single parent homes cannot generally handle children, their education, their socialization, the lack of violence.
What
as
you're
well as
overlooking is
two-parent
that
homes.
there's a whole universe of resources, family resources that are not captured in the statistics that just write me off as a product of a single parent household.
It doesn't
And
write you
I
off.
may be exceptional, but not everybody's exceptional. There are
You are-
plenty of folks who are regular folks who were raised by single parents and are doing just great.
Rick, stop. Rick, stop. We'll pick this up again. I think you might want to discuss this on another show, perhaps one coming 3 minutes. In any case, about the loss of the Eagles, Justin Tucker says, quote, simply as I can put it, I missed the kicks. And I'll leave it at that. I feel like I cost the team this one. Anyway, you were a good team today. And appreciate it, Rick and Tom. Appreciate it, Don and Chris, of course. And to our viewers who continue to increase in size, in numbers rather, not size. Everyone looks thin. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next time. And once again, we square off at squareoff.net. Bye-bye, everybody.